Now that the Romans have successfully removed the Carthaginians as a threat or as a problem, they have now used that warfare to expand not only into large areas of Africa and other areas controlled by the Carthaginians, but they're also now expanding further to the east as they take on some of the enemies that had tried to support the Carthaginians against Rome in the wars. And this is in Greece proper and in some of the Greek and Hellenized societies of what you know as modern-day Turkey and into the areas of Asia, that direction. So Rome now is expanding far beyond its original borders. Now, when Rome was expanding against its neighbors, they had geography in common, significant amount of religion and other ideas and concepts. They had taken in lots of Greek understandings and values from the Greek city-states of southern Italy. And then, of course, as they expand outwards against the Carthaginians, they bring in more and more areas that need to be controlled, more areas for potential taxation, and things like that. But one of the key elements that's going to be interesting for us to talk about now is that this now emerging, essentially I'm going to use the word empire, but what I mean by that is that they have now created this massive state that's being controlled by military means, and that even though the government back in Rome might still be functioning as a republic, they are becoming aggressively more and more an imperialistic power that is creating a very large base of nations that are being controlled directly or indirectly by the Romans and have large amounts of tax revenue and other things that are flowing back. One of the key elements here, and this is what this is, this picture here, this is depicting slaves, all right? Remember, all the early societies we've studied so far have had slavery in some form or the other. Prisoners of war oftentimes are made slaves. People who are born of slaves are considered slaves. And then, of course, there are those who have to sell themselves into debt and cover their debts by slavery. But increasingly what's happening is, since Rome has had so much expansion across the Mediterranean, they have essentially created a massive amount of slaves. Many of the subject peoples they put into the slavery system, and now slavery is becoming extremely easy in the sense that they have a lot of sources, but also extremely cheap in the sense that slaves are able to be used as economic engines in agriculture, in weaving, in large-scale ceramics production, in other areas. There is so much slavery that it's becoming an easy way to support a system that we had seen, for example, earlier. What I want to think about here for a second is think about a military elite that's now going to be able to function by itself and expanding itself militarily and training itself militarily, while the rest of the agricultural work and the business of the average everyday are going to be conducted by slaves. There's some parallels here when you think about, say, Spartan development, where you had that same kind of thing, where we have a centralized military core of people who are going to be using slavery as the economic engine of their state and maintain control that way. This slavery in the new Roman era that is emerging is relatively harsh slavery. It is in many ways this idea that subject peoples are not going to have any ability to do what they wish, need, or desire, and that this slavery will be a very harsh backbone to the Roman state. What also is going to happen with that is that with this reliance on slavery, that means that the system of control is going to be by military means. That, in other words, sort of like Sparta with its slave population, part of the military had to be set aside to make sure the slaves didn't go into rebellion. Another thing that's interesting here is with the idea that slaves can work for so little and are relatively cheap, it essentially undermines any kind of independent working class inside of Rome. That slavery is so cheap and can be used in so many ways that it sort of undermines the underpinnings of a larger economy. When labor is that cheap, there's no really room for a lot of people in the sort of middle classes of artisanal workers in terms of specialists and things like that. There's very little for them. Also, this expansionism had tied a lot of Romans to the prestige of owning slaves and conquering territories overseas. This means that there is this reinforcing mechanism that we should keep going in terms of expansion, that expansion is the way to go, that is what's going to be the future of the Roman Empire, that their military successes now in the late Republic as we go into the empire, Their military successes are becoming so great and so influential that they're changing the economy, they're changing the concept of rule, and increasingly the Roman state is becoming essentially corrupted from the inside by money. And one of the first examples we have of that is, remember, the Roman state's army had always been the small farming class that contributed male members of the family to service in the state, and that they were independent farmers who were able to do that and had other family members control the army or the food and other production on the farm back home. What we have now, with an increasingly professionalized sort of long-term service in the military, many of those families had to give up their farms back home. They did not have sufficient labor. Many rich Romans were able to now create these massive plantation-type farming productions using slaves, and there was no need then for the small farmer anymore. They're getting squeezed out. And that was a basis that always had been sort of important to Rome, that small farming class, that dedicated sort of citizen soldier who knew his place in society, the ultimate sort of Cincinnatus model, right? The man who was the farmer who would do his duty and then go back to his farm. That cycle's now broken. Slavery's becoming too powerful, it is too cheap, and this is going to create some significant economic problems for the long-term stability of Rome. In this aspect, take a look at some of the things from this chapter readings that you're looking at. Notice that this change in Rome is going to have economic as well as military impact, and notice that now the Roman state is going to have to redo how it organizes itself, especially militarily. Be sure to check out those sample questions.